Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining this information session presenting the 2022 Notice of Funding Opportunity for the National Endowment for the Humanities Education and Training Grant Program. My name is Mary Downs. I'm a Senior Program Officer in the Division of Preservation and Access and Program Coordinator for the Education and Training Program. At the top, I should alert you that at times I will be referring to the program as E&T, as Education and Training, and the Notice of Funding Opportunity as the NOFO for short. Here's the agenda for this webinar. I'll begin by discussing the programmatic objectives for the Education and Training Program, including the funding structures that we offer, applicant eligibility, and the types of project teams we typically see with successful applications. Next, I will discuss some of the changes to the program that we have implemented for this year. I'll mention some of the areas of special interest and special encouragements, and I will share a few examples of awards that we have funded in recent years. I'll conclude the webinar by briefly going over the application review process, including the review criteria for the E&T program, some tips for preparing and submitting your application, and finally, other resources for learning more about this program. Education and Training is a grant program that is administered by NEH's Division of Preservation and Access, which is one of the 7 divisions and offices at NEH. Here, you see the 7 divisions and offices, the larger divisions, Research, Education, Public Programs, and Preservation and Access, and the offices of Challenge Grants, Digital Humanities, and Federal-State Partnerships. This is just so you understand where the Division of Preservation and Access falls within the organization of the agency's funding programs. The Education and Training Program supports projects that address the education and training needs of preservation professionals responsible for preserving and creating access to humanities collections at libraries, museums, and archives across the country. While preservation, education, and training may encompass a range of activities and disciplines, the focus of this program must be on the preservation of and access to humanities collections. The types of collections and materials that may be the subject of your project include, but are not limited to, art, textiles, paintings, archaeological and ethnographic objects, photographs, manuscripts, paper, rare books, archival records, as well as audiovisual and born digital materials. As I said, the program supports the development of knowledge and skills among professionals responsible for preserving and creating access to humanities collections. This is done through 3 main categories or institution types, that is, preservation field services, continuing education, and graduate education. The latter actually has 2 subcategories: art conservation programs, which is very specific, and other graduate programs that might offer museum studies, library and information science, or archival degrees. Awards are made to organizations that offer national, regional, or statewide education and training programs across the pedagogical landscape and at all stages of development, from early curriculum development to advanced implementation. Awards help the staff of cultural institutions, both large and small, obtain the knowledge and skills needed to serve as effective stewards of humanities collections. And awards prepare both mid-career as well as emerging preservation professionals. And finally, projects may introduce students and heritage practitioners to standard curriculum offerings, as well as new information and advances in preservation and access practices. Applicants may request up to $350,000. We have a submission deadline of May 17th, 2022 for all applications. Any U.S. nonprofit organization with 501c3 tax-exempt status, accredited public and 501c3 institutions of higher education, state and local governmental agencies, and federally recognized Native American tribal governments are eligible to apply for the Education and Training Grant Program. Individuals, along with foreign or for-profit entities, are not eligible to apply. Partnerships are welcome, and we accept applications from consortia or institutions working together. When two or more eligible institutions collaborate on a project, one of them must serve as the lead applicant. Programs that grant graduate degrees in art conservation may apply for up to $250,000 in outright funds and up to $100,000 in federal matching funds for a period of performance of not less than 3 years and up to 5 years. That is, they would have a total budget of $450,000. $250,000 requested in outright funds, $100,000 requested in federal matching funds, which then would be matched by $100,000 in private third-party funding. All other applicants may apply for up to $350,000 in outright funds or a combination of outright and matching funds not to exceed $350,000 for a period of performance of up to 3 years. Applicants may apply for funds to provide a 1-year postgraduate fellowship for emerging preservation professionals. These fellowships aim to bridge the gap between completion of graduate training and full-time employment by offering specialized training in preservation and access topics. Applicants may request funding for one fellowship each year of the period of performance. The maximum stipend for 1-year fellowships is $50,000, and the award ceiling for the entire project may not exceed $350,000. What's new for 2022? We made a few changes for the 2020 Notice of Funding Opportunity, that is 2 years ago, and these are still in effect, but they're also still worth highlighting for this year's 2022 opportunity. And I just want to make you aware of these. Fellowships, mentorships, and residencies are eligible activities across all the categories of funding for preservation field services, for continuing education, and for graduate conservation programs. What's new also includes expansion of emerging professional development opportunities, partnerships between academic and non-academic institutions, reaching underrepresented communities, and a new funding structure for graduate art conservation programs. I wanted to highlight what is new in the 2022 Notice of Funding Opportunity. Students at the undergraduate, post-baccalaureate, and master's level may be included in a project's objectives. It can also support fellowships, internships, apprenticeships, mentorships, and/or residencies across all grant categories. The maximum stipend for a 1-year fellowship is now $50,000. We've also added this year an encouragement for training in new or recently updated standards, methodologies, tools, and equipment or workflows. And encouragement for activities that create more equitable and inclusive approaches to collections care. I also want to highlight what we call areas of special interest. These are topics that we are prioritizing. You can develop a project in any area of preservation and access, education, and training that fits the guidelines. These are just topics that we consider to be high priority. Best practices in emergency management and preventive conservation, culturally appropriate practices and technologies, activities that create more equitable and inclusive approaches to collection care, activities that support preservation and access practitioners in diverse institutional, geographic, educational, and demographic settings. Training in new standards, methodologies, tools, and equipment and workflows. Preventive conservation and environmentally sustainable preservation strategies. Preservation techniques and access solutions for audiovisual, digital, and time-based media. If you have a project that does not seem to fit into one of these areas, you should definitely still apply. These areas are of interest. They're intended as a guide for potential applicants, and they're no way intended to privilege certain types of projects over others. As I'll discuss later in this webinar, our review process strives to offer a fair and objective review for every application. I want to pause for a moment on one area of special interest, which is not new to E&T this year, but is familiar to our work across the agency. At NEH, we value contributions of underrepresented communities. What that means for the E&T program is that we encourage projects that pursue the education and training needs associated with the work of preserving humanities collections for all communities. We would very much like to see proposals for how to make the work of preserving humanities collections more accessible, more sustainable, and more manageable for institutions with limited capacities. Over the years, the E&T program has supported fantastic projects that have tackled issues of preservation and access for Indigenous communities and for smaller institutions, just to name two examples. I'd like to highlight a couple of examples of recent E&T awards. In 2020, we supported the Midwest Art Conservation Center, which is based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, for a regional preservation field service program that strengthens preservation practices and the care of humanities collections at hundreds of museums, historical organizations, libraries, and archives in 5 states of the upper Midwest. Activities include training workshops, disaster response services, preservation needs assessments and surveys, the loan of environmental monitoring equipment, and information and outreach services. In all, the project supports more than 20 workshops, reaching hundreds of staff members at over 400 cultural heritage institutions in the Midwest. The award additionally supports training for 2 Native American Conservation Fellows as part of its Native American Collections Care Fellowship Program, which began in 2018. The program has demonstrated successful outcomes and measurable results, keeps its programming accessible to even the smallest institutions in the region, is staffed by knowledgeable conservators and preservation experts, and is devoted to this region's collections. Also in 2020, NEH supported the Foundation for Advancement in Conservation. Its acronym is FAIC. In a program entitled Training for Emergency Preparation and Response for Humanities Collections. In this project, FAIC is improving emergency preparation and response for humanities collections by creating a new Alliance for Response network of cultural leaders and emergency managers in the state of Oklahoma. They are also training a regional volunteer response team for cultural collections in Georgia, and they're providing continuing education, nationwide training and resources for existing Alliance for Response networks, and the building of web-based resources, including a new forum planning guide and other key tools. Another education and training project is being undertaken by New York University and involves the development of a curriculum for collaborative curation of Native American cultural heritage collections, training of 50 to 70 staff in 6 institutions across the United States, assessment and evaluation of the training, testing of 2 new traditional knowledge labels, and creation of a collaborative curation center for online sharing of the curriculum and resources. And finally, I wanted to give you an example of a funded project in graduate education in the conservation of humanities collections. At the University of California, Los Angeles, NEH is supporting 3 years of community collaboration training, internship support, and student stipends for 3 incoming graduate students at the UCLA Getty Interdepartmental Program in the Conservation of Cultural Heritage. For this project, 3 master's graduate students will focus on the specialized practices of collaborative conservation. Over the course of 3 years, the designated NEH Fellows are developing capacity as conservators while working closely with community stewards to enhance collection care practices within their cultural context. The program is refining the pioneering model it has developed for collaborative work with tribal museums and extends it to other important yet underserved collections and sites with a wider range of stakeholders. The project supports partial stipends to support fellows during the first 2 years of the program, and on 2 summer internships, and for their thesis research and a 9-month internship in the 3rd year. Let's shift gears now and look at how to apply and how to understand the application process. The first stage in NEH's application review process is peer review. A panel of outside experts with relevant knowledge evaluates a group of applications. The reviewers read the applications and make preliminary comments and ratings, and then they meet to discuss them as a group. The reviewers evaluate proposals against the criteria that you can see listed here on the slide: the significance or impact of the proposed activities, the soundness of the methodology and the program structure and activities, the project's recruitment plan, its evaluation plan, staff expertise and qualifications, and budget. I will say that applicants have sometimes overlooked project evaluation, which may be expressed differently depending on the context of your proposal. Your discussion of how you or an outside party will evaluate the results of your project can be a key indicator in the viability of your project and the extent to which you will hold yourself accountable for its timely success. Here are the major components that you'll need to create and assemble for your application. A full listing of all materials appears in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Some of the materials are standard forms, but for many of them, you'll prepare a document and ultimately save it as a PDF for uploading into grants.gov. Please follow formatting requirements and naming conventions carefully because they can impact your application's eligibility. Most of these items are straightforward, but I'd like to point out a few things. Our agency has shifted to using a standard budget form, which is called the Research and Related Budget form. A separate budget justification is required that provides requested information about certain budget items. You may also use the budget justification to include cost share. Please understand that cost sharing is voluntary and may be used in instances where the total costs exceeds the amount awarded by NEH. Cost sharing will not be considered in the evaluation of applications. You'll find detailed information in our Notice of Funding Opportunity explaining how to complete the budget form. But if you have additional questions about the budget, we encourage you to reach out to our colleagues in the Office of Grants Management who can assist you. We also require applicants to supply a detailed work plan as a separate attachment. In your main narrative, you'll want to outline the activities for your project. The attached work plan should be used to provide a more comprehensive timeline. It's important that you explain succinctly how each activity informs subsequent work and how you will coordinate project partners or outside collaborators. The narrative is your opportunity to make the strongest possible case for your project. Don't assume that reviewers know anything about your institution or project beyond what you present in the narrative and application. While it may seem obvious, we cannot emphasize enough that the best narratives are those that adhere to the sections outlined in the Notice of Funding Opportunity and address all review criteria. Your application will be reviewed by a range of readers with varying backgrounds. Many reviewers may be your peers, and so it's important that you demonstrate your knowledge of the field and other recent education and training initiatives. On the other hand, successful applications are those that can explain the significance of your education and training work for a general educated audience who may be more interested in how your work will have an impact on the work of the humanities. Letters of support are optional, but they can be effective in affirming the impact that your project will have in the preservation field and the humanities. Applications for NEH grants, like many federal grants, are submitted through a web portal called grants.gov. If you are new to the system, I would recommend spending some time getting familiar with it before you submit your application. Your institution, if it has not done so already, needs to register at least a month before applying. We strongly urge that you apply as early as you can, as the system can get overwhelmed in the 5 minutes before the midnight deadline. Grants.gov support is available 24/7. Applicants are now required to sign into grants.gov with login.gov. More information can be found on the login page of grants.gov. While the process is not complicated, we do urge you to allow yourself some extra time to navigate the new login procedures when you begin to apply. All NEH grant applications go through a lengthy review process, which has several stages. The first stage, and what we consider the foundation for our entire review process, is the peer review panel. Evaluators read the applications, they write comments, and then post a rating. Then they meet to discuss the applications. Following the peer review, NEH staff recommends which applications should move forward. Those recommendations are considered by the National Council on the Humanities. 26 people, scholars and others, nominated by the President and approved by the Senate. The Council makes recommendations to the endowment's chair, who takes all this information into consideration and makes the decision on which applications to fund. It's a long process, but it allows for rich review. After awards are announced, applicants can request the comments from their evaluators. If your proposal is not funded, the reviewer's comments can help you think about how to revise your proposal for a subsequent grant cycle. We have many general tips and strategies for submitting a competitive application, but I thought I would focus on just a couple here. In the case of ENT, we often receive projects that are overly focused on preserving a specific humanities collection in your institution. Such activities, when not tied to contributing to the broader knowledge of the preservation field, will typically not be competitive and in some cases may be declared ineligible. We have several programs dedicated to preserving your institutional collections. We'd hate for you to put a lot of work into preparing an application only to discover that your project would be better suited for another NEH program. If you have questions about whether the education and training program is the right program for your project, it's best to reach out to us and speak with a program officer. As I've mentioned before, always keep in mind that the humanities are central to what we do at NEH. It's the primary lens with which we review all grant proposals, even those that are scientifically based, as may be the case for an ENT project. Finally, applicants often get into trouble when they don't plan ahead. You want to make sure that you have enough time to study the guidelines, plan your project, consult with partners, collaborators, and your administration, draft your application, and get feedback from colleagues. I've presented a lot of information in a compact format. You can find the Notice of Funding Opportunity along with other useful information and sample successful application narratives on our website at NEH.gov. If there's nothing else that you take away from this webinar, it should be that program staff are always available to assist you with questions about preparing and submitting your application. Program officers are available to read drafts submitted to our preservation email account, preservation@NEH.gov, no later than April 12th. Even if your draft is not fully developed, this can be a helpful and informative exercise. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to attend this webinar. Thanks very much. Have a great afternoon.